If you implement these 5 simple strategies, I guarantee that the next webinar you run will be hugely improved. I'll be talking about things you can do to increase the attendance rate, the engagement rate throughout the webinar, and also those money-making conversions that happen after the webinar is done. I'm Jakub, I'm a community strategy consultant and workshop facilitator, and to date, I've run over 300 webinars, and these 5 strategies really improve the results of the online events I run. So without further ado, let's jump right into the 5 strategies. Number 1 is all about setting expectations before the webinar even starts. I recently signed up for an online conference, and all I knew was that it's gonna start at 3 p.m. The time zone or the end time wasn't specified on the landing page. I knew it's gonna be a long day because they booked over 20 speakers over 3 days, but because this information wasn't provided on the landing page, I wasn't able to plan my day around the conference. Always share the start and end time of your event, and if you're planning something bigger like an online conference, include a detailed agenda for your event. Another thing to mention is whether your attendees need to prepare something in advance or bring some supplies to the webinar, like post-it notes or a notebook. Always share that information beforehand, so they're not scrambling around searching for these supplies last minute. Sometimes on very special occasions, you might want to run your webinar as an online event, meaning that people will have their cameras on and they'll be able to unmute their mic. This should also be communicated before the webinar, so you're not catching these people off guard. A great place to set all these expectations is your webinar's landing page, the invite email or the reminder emails you'll be sending. By setting these expectations, you're increasing the chances of people turning up to your event fully informed and ready to engage with your content. Number 2 is all about keeping your audience engaged throughout the webinar. As you know, our attention span is super short, so it's super important that you keep re-engaging with your audience while you present your content. One of the techniques you can use is to post questions throughout the webinar, not just at the beginning, but throughout the webinar, so the audience can reply in the chat. When you start your webinar, don't just ask your audience where they're from. That's basic. Try to ask questions that are actually relevant to the topic of your webinar. Let's say you're hosting a webinar about personal branding. You could ask questions like, what social media have you tried before? Or what are the main challenges with being consistent with personal branding? Another simple but effective trick to re-engage your audience with your content is to switch between camera, your slides, and back to camera. If your setup allows you to add extra cameras, you can play with different angles or simply zooming in and zooming out on the presenter. Number 3 is insanely important, and it's all about following up after the webinar is done. I know it's very easy to just shut that webinar window, pack your things and go home, but listen, stay a little bit longer and send that follow-up email. Your audience is very warm after the webinar is done. They just committed an hour or even more to listen to you and your content. Follow up as soon as you can to increase the chances of the audience converting and becoming customers. If you can, try to personalize those emails. Write different email copy for those who attended the event and those who signed up but never attended because they might need more context about what was happening during the webinar. Things to include in those follow-up emails are the webinar recording, any resources you promised during the presentation, and the call to action that speaks about your products or services. Number 4 is all about having a plan B and being prepared for any tech issues you might have. It's gonna happen sooner or later. Your computer will be slow, your internet will be down, and the software you're using will be updating for ages. Always test your equipment hours before the webinar and make sure that your software is actually up to date so you don't have to stress minutes before the webinar starts. When you're hosting a webinar with a guest speaker, and their internet connection drops, don't panic. It happened to me hundreds of times. Just email them and try to get them back online as soon as possible. And I think this is probably one of the most important things. When something goes wrong, try to keep your audience up to speed with what's happening. It's not a matter of if, but when you'll have tech issues, so be prepared to improvise. Number 5 is all about analyzing the data. Most webinar software will provide you with some basic analytics that you can use to improve your webinars in the future. For example, looking at sources of signups can provide you a lot of information about where you should put more effort in when promoting your event. Let's say you're hosting a webinar and 80% of the signups come from LinkedIn. This insight could mean that LinkedIn is an excellent source of audience audience for your online events. If you invite contacts from your mailing list, look at the number of people that actually sign up to your webinar. Let's say you have 1,000 people on your mailing list, but actually 20 convert to your webinar sign up. If this conversion rate is very low, that could mean that maybe the topic is not very interesting to your audience, or that there are some issues with copy on the landing page or in the invite email. Another interesting metric to look at is the webinar drop-off time. If a lot of your attendees close the webinar window at the same time, that could indicate that there might be an issue with your content and that it wasn't engaging enough. And that's it. 5 simple strategies you can do to hugely improve the performance of your webinars. If you test these, please let me know. I'd love to know what worked and what didn't work for you. That's it for now. See you in the next video.